Look the ugly guys.
Hey, welcome to the town hall. I'm Malice, your temporary host again until the
Yeah.
life stops hating on Zaylen. And we also have Zeb, we got Puka, Poison Taco, and our
Yo,
guest, Gaspera.
Hey.
Today we're going to be discussing the very, very touchy subject of are MMOs dying? But I guess the first thing we should talk about is what is the definition of an MMO? How do we define the genre? Because until we have a definition, we don't know if it's dying, really. So let's go with the noisiest person in the room first. Puka, what do you got?
MMOs, as we know, began in 2004 with the birth
Oh
of World of
god.
Warcraft. um,
Troll.
yeah. So for me, when it comes to defining MMO, we're defining what an MMO is. Classically, what I look for is a shared space. Basically, it's an online world that people interact with together, and there are repercussions to those actions. And I don't necessarily mean like a sandbox space, but when you say MMO and you look back at the classic titles, EverQuest, Ultima Online, Dark Age Camelot. A lot of those early titles, that's ultimately what I define MMO by, and moving that forward, that definition ultimately, in my opinion, still holds true. It's a online share space that multiple people are able to log into and interact with, together.
When you say multiple people, though, because are you talking about like 5 or 6, or because that could potentially walk the land of like Halo into the MMO space,
sure.
Because you could have 32 players fighting.
Ultimately, for me, what I think is important about the space is that it is what is static. In other words, it's always there. There isn't like, the map's loading up, or we wiped it. We're gonna do it all again for another week. It's meant to be a persistent world that's built. Yeah, there's some changes that happen from developers, but ultimately this world builds. It'll exist whether you log in or not. The world is existing and things are happening whether or not you're there. Does that make sense? And that's ultimately what my definition revolves around. And I think we all kind of know the classic titles that I'm referencing. When I talk about what an MMO is.
Referenced WoW already. What other classic title was there?
But that's about,
Poison Taco, do you have add to that?
I don't know.
Definition?
It gets really gray and it gets really murky because there's people out there that think Destiny is an MMO, where Destiny is just a lobby at best, where you then kind of mingle in with other people here and there. And I guess some people even consider the Division to be an MMO. So I think there's kind of two parts of it. One, the MMO genre has kind of branched off and turned into these other games. And it's been so long since we've had a real MMO that a lot of the people now are kind of looking around. They don't even know what an MMO is anymore.
Well, I think lots of the classic elements of MMOs have filtered into the other games. This is your peanut butter in my chocolate, or my chocolate in my peanut butter. So the massive multiplayer aspect came into shooters, and we had stuff like Division or Warframe or what have you, that have massively multi aspects, but are typically very small scale. And I think it's another thing that's important is if you caveat, one thing I haven't heard mentioned is a persistent online world to interact with, and change or not change as the case may be.
Puka did kind of add that, but yeah, that's persistence is definitely one of the key aspects. Is if the world isn't persistent, if it's not congruent, if it's not I mean, obviously there are layered flavorings and things like that. Like even World of Warcraft did it, where they started doing phasing and things like that as you move through quest contents and whatnot. But overall, the world is something that everyone can interact with. When you mentioned Destiny 2, you can drive around in a persistent world and see other players and jump into events that are randomly in the world with people who are not in your group. So would that not fall into that category?
I mean, personally, I think it
Go ahead.
does. I think it does mainly because if the answer is no, then I think I'm thinking the MMO space is really, really dying. Because those are the games in our genre that are mostly succeeding right now. They're not quite as heavy in the RPG elements as where this genre started, but they're bringing a lot of people together, and those people can interact with random people that they just happen to run into while they're
And
doing
who
their.
says that they need to have RPG elements? That's a misnomer. We just started as an RPG movement. It didn't have to end up like one.
Well, I think as we can really separate the term MMO and MMORPG
Yes.
because I guess we could almost look at the arguments more along the is the MMORPG dead, because it seems that we're moving away from that RPG element.
Hold on, let me change the title.
Well, even then, like I would say Planet Side and Planet Side 2 are the only real MMO FPS games.
So, and I think a common subject, and maybe we're just gonna have to either get over it or figure it out, is ultimately I think our issue is with phasing or separate servers that exist on the same layer. And when we talk about, or when I talk about it like an MMO, and I say the server is Cenarian Circle, the location is Goldshire. What does that mean? That means if you're on Cenarian Circle server, you have a character, and you go to Goldshire, you're seeing everybody on Cenarian Circle in Goldshire. There's no getting around that. Now, and that's in Classic. That's not the case today, but there's no getting around that. Like, that's just how it happened, right? There were physical servers. They existed. They ran the world. And when you were at a location, everyone that was on that server was there. And developers did a lot of locking down to servers. Your characters were server bound. A lot of times you were able to create characters on other servers. Some titles you weren't. But ultimately you were locked in there. And now, I believe ultimately it has been done in a move to allow people to play together more, because
Is Guild Wars 2 an MMO?
Yeah, correct, right? Because if we're going by like, hey, phasing, having phasing is not an MMO, then it's like, I don't know. Because when you talk about the world server, when you talk about the fact that your server selection has no implication outside of WW in Guild Wars 2. It's like everyone's just on the same server, and you're just thrown into these worlds with your friend groups. Now, obviously, that world is its own little instant server. And the problem is, because I'm of the type that I dislike this current state of MMOs. I dislike the phasing. I dislike I never know who I'm going to see. The having multiple levels and randomly only running into people on my friends list.
What you're kind of describing there, Puka, is essentially just some kind of fancy matchmaking system. They're working on the back end to optimize who you're playing with.
Absolutely.
I think the word we're missing here is massive and massively multiplayer online game. When I think a massively multiplayer game, I think EVE, where you can have battles of 30,000 people duking it out. Yeah, it's a slideshow, but people tell stories about it.
And
I think of PlanetSide 2, where I can have 50 friends, we can all pull out tanks, and we can roll around, and then we can meet another group of 50 to 100 people, they're all in tanks, and we can slug it out. These are elements that you can't find anywhere else. And if you want to call something like Destiny or The Division or any of these games that try to, that just add window dressing to matchmaking.
They fake
it. There's no comparison. You can't get PlanetSide 2 in any other FPS game, period.
I will agree that that type of experience is exactly what I'm looking for when I think MMO. I am looking for a shared space where everyone that picks a server, you're going to see all the people there, and it might break it. And ultimately, that's why these titles have done that, is to guarantee a certain experience to the individual, right? It's like, well, you're not going to see more than 16 people on screen. Why? Because we don't have the tech to handle that as developers. That's why. Do they want to add more? Sure, maybe. But the point is the tech doesn't exist. Like, everyone would want to have thousands of players, but they're like, how do we balance this awesome gameplay with thousands of people? And no one's really been able to do it. And that's why a lot of our classic titles, when you really break them down, you're like, wow, the gameplay was a lot of crap sometimes. But we had all these people, and then we look at modern titles just like, well, I got 16 people, but the gameplay's rock solid, you know? And it's that, like, that's that balance, but they are using MMO play name because they do have a lot of people that are all able to play together.
The other element, too...
Just not at the same time.
The other element we're missing, too, is the social element. Like you're saying, these previous games, they never played very well. Well, case in point, look at something like Star Wars Galaxies. If you logged into that game today, it plays like ass. Like, the actual game itself plays like ass, right?
Yeah.
But why do people remember it? Why do people look at it fondly? Because it had all the social aspects to it. You met people. You grouped up with people. You had shared achievements, shared goals that you worked towards.
It was also the first game that actually was more difficult to run than your job, so...
Yeah. And
I mean, but everything you just said applies to, like, Destiny and Division as well.
Not necessarily.
You did meet up with people. You did befriend them. You did have...
Not true. In Destiny, you can't even voice chat with people not on your friends list. So you have to go outside of the game just to make friends in Destiny.
You're talking about, like, because there wasn't voice chat in Star Wars Galaxies. Not
no, but
maybe thankfully.
Well,
thankfully.
Destiny doesn't have text chat either.
Sure, so
there is no
a
way
layer
to communicate with random people in Destiny.
Correct. There is a layer of segregation of player base, and that random person you meet, it is difficult to have a nuanced experience with that person.
So I bring up this question then. In a way, Destiny is almost the definition of every player's experience that they didn't like in MMOs. They didn't want to be trolled by random jerks who were telling them they're assholes. They didn't want to always have to stand in a line to go do content. They didn't want all of these things. So really, Destiny is the culmination of every MMO player's complaints down to the minutia of going, well, here, only a few players will be in your instance, so maybe there'll be 10, 15, 20 people fighting the one boss encounter or something like that. There won't be any more because then it gets... then you're kind of kill stealing each other and all this other crap. We can't really talk because you can't then be assholes to each other.
Don't know how to talk about it.
It's basically a big nerf rap around the MMO genre is Destiny 2. I mean, it's what players want. And I always, as a former developer, I always like to say what players think they want versus what they end up enjoying, because they say a lot of things, but then at the end it creates a different experience that the unintended consequences of their desired experience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like how people go, oh, I want to be able to get to max level very quickly. I'll pay $60 to skip the leveling process. And then what happens is you get your level 60 in WoW or whatever the hell MMO you're playing, and you don't know how to play your class because you weren't leveling it.
And I want to add, too, I don't know if it's proper to say it's like, hey, this is what players want based off feedback. I think the reality, and something a lot of people have to understand, when something works and when things are going right, you just don't hear any feedback. Like, you don't have people lining up to go, this is awesome! That's not what you get.
The proof of concept is
silence.
that people are playing Puka.
Correct.
That's
absolutely. And so, ultimately, here's the deal. It's MMOs way back in the day, like, there were not tons of people playing. And now we've had a lot of gamers that came up playing these single-player experiences, playing these match-made experiences. And they've offered this in-between. Because the old-school MMO, like the sandbox experience that I think everyone in this channel desires and thirsts for, That's a minority in this space. Like, that is ultimately, when you talk about, like, from a developer standpoint, if they create a game around that, they're hitting a small portion of the market of people that like to play games with their
Not
friends.
necessarily. Not
Instant
necessarily.
gratification is everything now.
I'll make the argument. So World of Warcraft came out in 2004, and then of course World of Warcraft exploded.
When beginning of MMOs, we covered this.
Everyone wanted to be like World of Warcraft, to the point where even Star Wars Galaxies, which is as sandbox as you could get with a mainstream title like Star Wars, they ushered in the whole NGE new game experience to make it more like World of Warcraft, which everybody universally hated at first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, capitulating to the market.
And so as time goes on, anybody who's funding a game, anybody who's funding an MMO, like your venture capitalists, your publishers, they're going, I want it like World of Warcraft. That has 10 million subscribers. That's making $1 billion a year. I want your game to be like that. Time goes on.
That's how we ended up with 15 years of WoW clones.
But I think what's important is to note why World of Warcraft exploded. Go ahead, boys, and finish.
So my point is, 10 years later, the only MMOs being made with any kind of money are chasing WoW. But at the same time, 10 years later, World of Warcraft has also changed. It's added things like Dungeon Finder. It's added all these convenience features. So really, to say that there's no sandbox MMOs because it's not popular, I would say that's false. I would say there's a very big demand for sandbox MMOs because there's a lot of smaller companies trying to make them that a lot of people want to play, but no one can make them. And
well, they're just more difficult. They're expensive to make because
they take far more time.
You're taking so from down to the data. You're talking about so like how a game makes itself look pretty is you place objects in the world, but then you bake them into your graphics so that they're a singular data point experience, right? When you have a true sandbox, you are always modifying the world. You are stacking blocks. You are moving blocks. All of these things are an infinite amount of data points, and that becomes massively taxing on servers. Look at ArcAge. They to limit their server hits, they changed their pack system so much so that you can't just have lots full of packs anymore. You need to keep moving them because they don't want those data points just eating up data by sitting on a lot. And a lot of that is you really need a lot of money to make that sandbox game. And that's what kind of scares me about a lot of the sandbox games that are coming out is they're being made by independent studios who don't have the funding to really create the server infrastructure that is needed for them.
Well, I want to go ahead, Gaspar.
I mean, that's what the new services, like Amazon's, servers allow them to do more easily. They can offload the difficulty of that to somebody else. And they can pay not terribly expensive for it.
If they can turn a profit on that. Like, that's important.
Assuming they can get enough people.
Correct.
To support.
To add another counterpoint, open world sandbox single player games are exploding. Right? You have, Skyrim, which made big open world RPGs mainstream. You have people basically eating up Bethesda until Fallout 76, but that's another story. You have Ubisoft basically entirely committing to the open world model. So if you had a big studio commit to an open world multiplayer game, people would eat it up. All it takes is someone to do it.
I don't know that
that they're gun shy after Sony invested $200 million into NeverQuest Next and then pulled the plug at the last moment. I think a lot of the big studios are gun shy.
I want to jump back to something. Hold on, I got to jump back to something. Go, Gaspar. Go, Gaspar. Go, say it.
The problem is, if you asked the 5 people in this room exactly what they want in a large sandbox MMO, you would get exactly 7 different answers.
Sure.
You're not wrong. And that's the problem. When you have too much choice, you have too much choice. It's like when it is a theme park, it is playing someone else's definition of a game and a dream, and it's their vision, and you play through it. Whereas a sandbox becomes no, but what ifs?
I want to jump back to a point. And this is going back to World of Warcraft kind of historically through time. And I will 100% make and stand by the argument that MMO spaces, though popular in our little spheres, very few players participated in MMOs prior to World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft did something unique. It made MMOs, for the large part, accessible to what we would consider more casual players at the time. In 2004, it made it extremely accessible. And what many people were willing to do was, from the games they were currently playing, that they were invested in, they were willing to sit those aside, because they've been playing those for many people 5 years at that point, 4 or 5 years. They were willing to put those to the side and say, let's go try this out. And then when enough people did that within their friend groups, the other people that were resistant to that, like, guys, this game's awesome. It doesn't have this, it doesn't have that. They eventually followed with their friends. So they had the minority of people that weren't completely satisfied with their current MMORPG experience. They went to World of Warcraft, and then they pulled everyone else in there as well. World of Warcraft exploded because of that. And what happened throughout the years?
Was the first MMO to not basically be a graphical mud?
Yeah. Well, what happened throughout those years?
Slash commands and everything like that.
It was all just built in. It was all running in the background. But what happened over those years is, because people initially moved there and got invested in that world, every time those cats launched an expansion and they listened to feedback and they tried to revitalize the system, almost every person that played that title at launch would come back and at least try it out for 2 months, 3 months, and they would bring more people with them. And so everyone would go away to these other titles that kind of promise what this friend group that they had built around WoW, and they had these desires of, well, these are the weaknesses we find in WoW. Then these other games come out and they promise to fix those weaknesses, and they do in some regards, and they innovate, but they don't pull you, because then WoW would launch another expansion, and all those people that have already been invested in World of Warcraft were pulled back. And I think a lot of people, when they look at
part of Blizzard's ruthless business model, though, is to do whatever they could to get into the alphas of the upcoming games and rend out of them the unique ideas that made those games special. And then go, okay, well, this MMO is like every other MMO, is going to go through at least 1 year of massive bugs and everything like that. Well, we're past that. So we're now going to integrate that idea plus WoW. So now it's going to be, why go play there when you have the one thing that makes that unique plus WoW?
And you've already got your friends here. You've already got established history here. You've got the Moist Towelette from Skull of Edge. You remember it? Like, everyone loves the Moist Towelette. Like, you've got all these years of experiences built within this title, and the fact that they could pull you back, and that worked for them for so long. And we're in this time now where there's a lot of drop off, and then we see them launch Classic, and that's been extremely popular for them, and it's been completely free. They're just trying to get people to sub. They're just adding value to their to the subscription model, which is a genius move for them. They know exactly what they're doing. And so the problem is, like, yes, investors compare themselves to World of Warcraft. They compare your product to Blizzard. They don't compare your product to 1999 EverQuest or 2001 Dark Age of Camelot. Like, that's not what your product's being compared to. Not in 2019. And that's ultimately, I think, unfair, but that's also the face of the market. Is we've had this
that's
giant,
the face of business. Is what
we've had this giant success story, and people are like, how can we emulate it?
I'm gonna reference someone who's currently talking in the stream chat. Cast I'm gonna say that the one thing is I don't think there is market saturation, because we really haven't seen anything new to the market. The biggest beast that happened with WoW was the death of true innovation and moving forward of MMOs, because at that point, you are how to best put this? You're just everybody played into one space, and MMOs are so expensive to make that it's hard to do the risk of pushing forward. See, if you spend $2 million on making a game and it fails, EA and all and companies like that just eat the cost and move on. They'll recoup what they can. When you spend $100 million on an MMO and it fails in the first year, you're decimated. That is an economic massive challenge.
And your studio closes.
There was a lot of innovation early on in MMOs. There was a lot of companies doing a lot of innovative things in the sandbox space. There was.
Right.
Unfortunately, they couldn't survive in the market with WoW. They couldn't.
Right. WoW pushed everyone out of the market, and WoW has set a bar of innovation. Well, I shouldn't say a bar of innovation, a bar of
polish,
expectation of income. And VCs are not going to they spent 10 years chasing that dream that was trying to invest in the next WoW, but it was never going to happen. And so lightning in a bottle happened once, and they were chasing it. And now VCs and a lot of people like that don't want to invest in that game space at all because it is so expensive and so risky.
Not to mention, for far less money, you can make a game on this thing and print $1 billion, right? Yep. For like what these people are, like what these VCs and what these
all you have to do is exploit children.
Is hey, I want to put out a game and get people to keep spending money on that game. Why invest $100 million into an MMO when I can make a stupid phone game and people will just eat that up and get stupid with money?
I mean, players today also get just as invested in other games as people used to in MMOs. They'll drop hundreds of dollars on a Fortnite, or a League of Legends.
Or even the single-player experience.
Or the single-player experience. They'll drop the same amount of money people used to drop on MMOs on those other titles.
I think EA said that FIFA makes $1 billion a year, not including sales of the game.
FIFA laugh if you guys want to, but FIFA is the #1 game in the world. Period.
Oh, I'm not laughing. I'm crying. Crying.
Yeah, that's
so
point.
true.
Yeah.
Soccer is the #1 sport, and they have figured out a way. They have figured out a way to put trading cards in their game and make you buy packs for them.
Mm-hmm.
So there is also a chance that if governments, keep in mind the UK is starting to crack down on loot boxes and microtransactions right now. If they do start to crack down, we could start to see the industry pivot back to things like MMOs. Maybe try and push subscriptions again instead of microtransactions.
Because they will want into the EU space for sure. They will want it, and without permission to sell in stores or on their online markets, they won't get it.
Yeah.
Though I would argue that if you look at the penetration numbers for MMOs, they don't penetrate well in Europe. They just don't. Whereas microtransaction type games have penetrated very well there. There just has never been.
Stop. My wife's 3 years old. My wife.
She heard the word penetrate and just lost it.
You can't you can't. You can't.
I mean, I really don't see monthly fees coming back. Basically, because just like free games, you cut out a large portion of your market that way. There are just a bunch of people that will not spend $15 a month to say I can play, but they'll gladly pay $20 a month to buy your costumes.
Do you think reward tracks are here to stay?
I think microtransaction model's here to stay until someone finds something even more ridiculous.
I don't think it's the end result, though. I mean, it's always an evolution, right? So we're right now we're looking at microtransactions. The next thing could be something a hybrid between microtransactions and subscription models, or something completely different that we haven't thought inside the box for.
Well, I mean, ArcAge is a perfect example of a game who lived on both of those. They milked every angle they could.
Yeah.
But I think the end result is that with microtransactions, you're seeing, particularly a lot of the Asian market development, is that unlike the current model in North America, where we are trying to develop a game that will have a minimum life of 5 years, the expectation in a Korean MMO is to put it out in a year and a half, slam it on the market, milk it for the microtrans it is. In 2 years, it is dead, deleted, and they can move on. And they literally are putting them out at a rate faster than you can play them. And so instead of why put new content into the existing game when you can milk people through microtrans systems to make pretty things, it's a lot easier to make tons of costumes, tons of in-game fluff, and you don't have to keep a dev team on it and continuously deving, where you could just go, we're going to go make a new game, and they just keep repeating and spitting out a new game and moving you through your content.
Well, Malice, you told me that publishers were engaged in a lot of asset sharing between developers in that market.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, because they use the same engines, they use a lot of things like that.
And so a publisher that owns multiple...
all about keeping their cards in their chest, and they don't want to share, and they're like, no, you can't steal my super secret technologies and things like that. And so everybody that wants to develop is developing from the ground up. And that's why it's $100 million process to make an MMO in North America. If you look at Asian market games, they cost a fraction of that because they're just another game slapped on another Unreal box, spitting out the same assets and the same things, and constantly. All right, so we produced it in $1 million instead of $100 million. Bam, and we just made triple what you're going to make doing it with $100 million.
It's why all these Korean MMOs have the same jiggle physics,
right?
Which are very good.
I mean, if you're like completely unrealistic jiggle.
There's some company that's selling them all that jiggle physics.
That's right.
And they're working really hard to make sure it's perfect.
Jiggle Limited Korea is what they're called.
Jiggle Limited.
Hey, at least they have their priorities straight.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I hear they're working on butt jiggle next.
It works. It works in the Western market too.
It's Jello in the back, kind of like J-Lo.
I'm pretty sure jiggle physics would work in any market.
Yeah.
So where do we sit as far as what we cleanly cut and define as an MMO? Where do we sit as a group on that?
Completely divided.
I really don't
Battle lines
think
drawn.
I really don't think there's an objective.
I would say you could say that if we're going to extend it to the full term MMO RPG, then we're talking about persistent world, massive multiple character interaction, large experiences. If you don't have those things, you are not an MMORPG. Destiny and things like that are the true MMO. They are the shrunken version of that. So if we want to look at that, we could literally put them in two different camps.
So games like let's talk
realistic separation of church
and
state.
Let's talk Battlefield. Let's talk Battlefield 5, Call of Duty, the past 18 of them, whatever. Are those MMOs or are those? Nope, not on the list. What do you guys think?
No.
They have zero persistent world.
No persistent. Okay. Do they have to have
literally matchmaking?
Okay, so we are saying I think persistence is the big hit here with MMO. Like when you see that loading screen, you're not loading up. Here's the base map. You know, there's a map that exists and people are in it. Maybe there's a fresh one spun up for you and you're the first one in it, but people are about to be following you. And you don't necessarily know. So that's like Destiny 2. Like if you're the first person on Saturn.
I think another difference is that map in Battlefield, that map has a definitive beginning, middle, end. If you play it, you're done. Then you move on with your life.
Sure.
You could even make, you know what, by this logic, you could even make that argument against Crowfall.
I was about to say, is Crowfall an MMO? Look at you, Poopy! Look at you, Poopy!
Y'all have no idea what just happened in my house.
Look at you, Poopy! Poopy! What were we
The
talking
puppy
about?
is now the star of our show.
Oh,
I guess the RPG element of what defines why Crowfall does what it does is an interesting twist to make it an MMORPG, which is the idea that there is a persistent section of the world
that's your housing, right?
That your housing, it's your state. You know,
Okay.
you literally have like the land and everything like that, and there is going to be a persistent part of the world, and players can interact and do all that stuff within that space. But then they become their crow spirit and inhabit the body that they want to go into this instanced adventure that may be 6 months long or whatever like that, or a 1 week long, depending on the style of gameplay you're.
But it's longer than a 1 hour like Battlefield 5 match.
Right. Yeah. I think the shortest is a 1 week still.
And that's, so I think that's okay, so long as, persistence takes place over more than, a couple hours or a day. It's not a map that's spun up, has an objective, is closed. These last for at least a week or a couple months into like 6 months as a max.
Another thing I'm hearing through all of us talking through is that the term persistent is being mixed with progression as well, and it should be, because these are MMO hallmarks. Progression is an MMO hallmark. Every MMO has progression. Every MMO has that, and now we're seeing it filter through to other games, which is why some games are confused for MMOs that maybe should not be, or vice versa.
Looter shooters and stuff like that, where you are having gear progression.
You have that persistent. You have the persistent gameplay.
Because since developers want to keep people playing their games as long as possible, they're looking for those elements from MMOs to keep people hooked without having to do all the other work.
Well, that's something that
keep them on the treadmill.
That's something that definitely, I'm sure, speaks to everyone in here. We love filling those bars. It doesn't matter what the bar is. We love filling bars. You love filling bars.
I think ultimately what results from that is like when people take elements from MMOs and cherry pick and put them into other games. I think ultimately it feels hollow. It feels incomplete. You're not getting that full experience that you signed up for, especially if you're an old timer and you played a lot of the older MMOs. Some of that is missing.
It's tanking the RPG element, and it's more of a storytelling element.
Right.
You are not building your story. You are being told a story, which is a single player game at that point. Division 2 is a perfect example. You are leveling through the process of a storyline. Sure, you have the open world element of running around and interacting with whatever quests and everything like that, but you don't interact with other players except for people you group with. And so, you're kind of... It's definitely... I think the PvP area is the only thing you could really say has any MMO true nature to it.
I think one thing that developers could really leverage is in a lot of these MMOs, there's achievements you can get as a group. And I'm not talking about like the worthless achievements you tick off a box and, you got an achievement. I'm talking about, like, in Camelot or Warhammer, you get a keep. You have your guild's name on it. That's something that's a shared achievement that you and a group of people work together. In World of Warcraft, to do that 40-man raid, that is a shared achievement with you and 39 other people to accomplish. And I think that's probably another big element is you have activities and things you just simply cannot do by yourself.
Okay, cool.
Makes sense.
Division 2's got that too.
Yeah, Destiny as well. They all have raiding content, they have group content. And I think these two titles, along with a lot of other looter shooters... but we're putting them as MMOs.
But if you're talking about literally group sizes of 3 and 4, because 5 is too much, that always is a flag to me about whether you're really an MMO.
I don't know. Division 2's got the 8-man raid.
Yeah, it's 2 groups.
Ooh,
you're
that's
right.
A raid.
It's hard. I tried it several times. I think it was hard.
I mean, most WoW content now you can do with 10. It's not that different than 8.
Well, regardless, I think we're kind of okay on our definition. So ultimately, the question that's left is, where do these, like, the future of these titles? Where do we see this going?
I think.
Go ahead.
I think it kind of hinges on the upcoming crowdfunded projects we've talked about before. Like, really, let's face it, the VCs are out. They tried, they're out. They're not coming back. The publishers, they've tried, they're out. They're not coming back. So the people that actually want MMOs, they've put their money where their mouth is. We have companies now of people that have made MMOs in the past. They are coming. They're in various stages of alpha at this point. We don't know when they're going to start coming out, but hopefully we get more winners than losers out of this, because if these guys screw up, MMOs are done.
We have one more big dog that we haven't talked about that's counter your example, which is New World and Lord of the Rings MMO coming from Amazon, which can very much say it is its own giant coming into the space.
But Amazon as a game studio, that's completely new. Yeah, these titles. Both of these titles will be proof of concept for them to see if they even know what they're doing.
And Amazon's probably using that to sell their server infrastructure.
Absolutely.
If they can get that right, hopefully they can convince other developers to jump on the bandwagon, and hopefully.
But that's a
things are
good
in
thing
good spot.
for the gaming space, in my opinion.
But VCs and investors aren't fully out, but they are definitely. They now look at what you can. This is why Kickstarter works. Is not so much the end result of how much you get, but if you can. Basically, Kickstarter is proof of concept. Do you have
Proof of concept.
50,000, 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 players who are like, we want to play your title. Here, have $1 even. Then that to VC goes, hey, we can at least invest in the first year's worth of gameplay and make some money on this.
Especially when you're pitching a subscription model.
Right. Camelot Unchained is, has investors. Star
And it
Citizen
also has
has
VCs.
investors.
And it also has VCs.
Right.
Right. So, but it used the initial Kickstarter as that. I think it's very telling that a lot of venture capitalists have started companies that are Kickstarter only projects.
Right.
So I think that's telling to the market.
Well, I think something that's important to understand about the future of these titles is, and again, talking with City State, I think what they're doing is completely correct in one regard. And they are saying, listen, we're going to be a niche title. Everybody's not going to want to flock to us. You like playing WoW? Don't donate. You won't like this title. Like, they are very upfront about what they are. And they know who
they're not trying to sell a
audience.
dream.
No,
Right.
They're not. They're like, listen, you're not going to have a lot of fun if you like Dungeon Finder. This isn't your title, Right. If you like being able to, log in and group up real fast through a UI with buddies, this isn't your thing. And they're pitching the experience that it's very limited, not in scope of play or fun, but it's a very niche thing, and they know what they're getting. And they're not saying they want 12 million players. They're like, if we get 100,000, we're on top of the world.
Right.
They're happy with what they get.
Yeah.
Well,
they're happy with what they've got. They're happy with what they've got. From Kickstarter backers.
Basically, as long as they can keep the lights on, they're fine.
Correct.
Well, and their base investment is a lot lower than the standard MMO, mainly because their team is very small. They're only now bulking up their team, and they're only going to spend that for a year, and then they'll lay off all those people.
Yeah, people are going to get laid off there. That's just the nature of it.
But they're also targeting employees that are, every one of them is a programmer. So they're all multitasking in the depth that they're involved, which is something that, like, when I was working in the MMO industry, I was just a content dev. My job was to take in-game tools and put content into the game. I had a programmer that I would be like, hey, I need the tool to do this, and he would invent the tool to do this. And I would go, hey, I need this quest written differently, and I would go to a writer, and the writer would do this. And when you move on into the realm of like how Camelot Unchained is, well, we're going to rip all that expense of having writers and having all that stuff in there, as well as removing that aspect of having such specialized employees. So you're really trimming down the fat and making it a lot cheaper to produce.
If it ever comes out, it's really vaporware.
Yeah.
Remember that.
Yeah.
It's all vaporware.
You're
Well,
trimming down the cost.
We've never seen a product.
Does the timeline?
It's all After Effects. Everything. It's just After Effects, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I would say my concern is really, is there still a large enough base of players in this genre to really support all of these endeavors? I'm not sure there are.
I don't know if all.
My fear is they're all going to try to launch on the same freaking 3 months.
Yeah.
That's my real
and that's so I think ultimately they will not all survive. When we're talking things like Crowfall, Ashes of Creation, Chronicles of Illyria, Camelot Unchained, I'll throw Star Citizen in there, even though it's 18 years off. But the point is, like, all those titles, I don't think they'll all succeed. You know, I have my hopes.
All the fantasy MMOs, like, they're going to start coming out around the same time, and the lines are going to get very blurry between them.
Yeah, and there's more than what I just listed, too. Like, I just listed the big ones. It's those little ones that are going to pull people away from the big ones as well.
And you'll still have the Korean ones coming across.
Correct. The non-stop allure that pull people for 2 months. And they're just like, eh.
But I will say that they attract a certain... Like, they're attracting a lot of players now, but I think they will only attract a certain genre of player that was already only flash buying current MMOs. So I think they're not going to be as missed as you would think. My biggest problem with Star Citizen... My biggest problem with Star Citizen and my biggest fear with Star Citizen is that while it has a lot of backers, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people were hoping and dreaming that it would be beyond what they were selling. And the one thing that they needed to do to be beyond what they were selling was that they were hoping an advancement of infrastructure to the level where they could have EVE level war. And I feel that that is going to fall short, and the EVE
it will not exist. It can't.
Its EVE community is the number one community that would go to the Star Citizen community, and I feel that they're going to go, wow, I like this, it's gorgeous, I like the interaction, I like the gameplay, but if I can't have 400 ships throwing down, or 400 players at least throwing down in a zone, I'm going to go back to...
A lot of it depends on server meshing, but again, that's another topic. Really... Sorry.
The point is the tech doesn't exist.
You're not wrong, Narth.
Yeah, the point is the tech doesn't exist now.
It might win 30 years when it comes out, though.
Well, and very, very true.
Well, that's kind of the hope and dream, yeah.
But I would say that Star Citizen attracts a different player than someone that plays EVE. You know, EVE is a spreadsheet player. Star Citizen's attracting first-person shooters. Star Citizen, in my opinion,
EVE though only put up with the spreadsheet because
sure.
It's the only real spaceship game out there.
I know a lot of EVE players who would love to be able to play like Star Citizen with first-person shooter or with their joystick in a cockpit. You know, there are a lot of EVE
keep
players.
In mind, if Squadron 42 is really good, that's also going to attract people that want to play the single-player story, and then there's going to be bleed off into the multiplayer side. Sure. As for these MMOs coming out that have more hardcore aspects to them, that aren't your dungeon finders, that don't have a lot of these convenience features, you got to look at things like Dark Souls and the other similar games that have come out in the last few years. There is definitely a desire in the market for more hardcore experiences. A lot of people are underserved, and simply because mainstream AAA games just aren't filling that need. And just because you're not seeing a lot of games like that does not mean there's no demand for it. And the other thing to also look out for is World of Warcraft might, like WoW Classic, might just reignite that desire for MMOs again. People are coming in, and what?
It's just so bad.
Gaspera looks like he's about to shit himself with the.
It's just so
no.
bad.
I hope that's not what reignites things. 'Cause that will give everyone the wrong idea once again.
Like, no.
We'll be back.
Every video I see, everyone's using the Quest Finder add-on so they can get the circles and the lines drawn with the arrow pointing which way to go. People don't want. They're not ready to go back to reading quest logs and listening to dialogue. They're not.
So one of the
instant gratification. It's pushing everything. I'll say it. Yeah, I've said it again.
I think though that what you see in a lot of these other games is I'm not sure hardcore is the best way to describe it. It is that they're simply either focusing on a niche so that you're always involved in that niche, so you don't need a dungeon finder to go do something else while you're questing. They're like, nope, there is no questing. You will be marching forward and doing this all the time, so you don't need a finder for it. Or you're going along the lines of like it's a full roleplay experience like Chronicles of Lyria, where it sounds gorgeous on paper at least, that the game will be every step will be an experience. You don't need to go to the Bob's Dungeon of Horrors just to get to work on your gear set, because it's going to be so dispersed. It's not going to be about collecting your gear set to get your next tier to go everything, which is what WoW does. And so a Dungeon Finder becomes a requirement. And a lot of those types of games and games in the past have always followed that kind of model, simplify it down. But if you look at I guess we could look at one of the cores of Origin. We look at Asheron's Call and EverQuest, the first kind of break-offs into full 3D MMOs. And Asheron's Call made content that was based on the world. So it was very random. It was you would get these loot keys and everything like that, and then you would go unlock these chests. And the chests would create randomly generated magic items. So it didn't matter where you really focused as long as you could farm for keys. Whereas EverQuest was what WoW was based off of, which is these are dungeons, these are dungeon sets. This is how to get the coolest items. Do this, follow this formula, and achieve X. And I think that was the first diversion we see. And I feel that if we follow Asheron's Call to its fruition, that's where you get the people who want to play the games that are sandbox. And you have the EverQuest chase, which is what WoW became, and I think that becomes a division in the genre. And I think that's important to look at when you're trying to figure out what your player base is and what future players you have and where you're trying to pull players from, because really there is, I think, where Gaspera was kind of going down the path of is there's a finite amount of players. If they're all playing WoW, they're not playing other stuff. And I think Cast was also saying, hey, if the saturation of market, there's only so many people that are playing anything, so your game's going to fail because there's no one chasing it.
So do you think it's good enough to just say, here we've got sandbox experience, we got a theme park or guided experience. These are your two. If you're an MMO player, you prefer one of these two. Do you think that's an okay statement?
Also keep in mind, Minecraft is 10 years old now. Think of those kids that were 8 years old playing Minecraft. They're going to get older, and they're going to be hungry for more games that are open like Minecraft.
I was 20 playing Minecraft. Whack, 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 whack.
Either way, you got to look. You got yes, they are still going to play Minecraft, Castile, but you know what? A lot of them are getting older now, and they might want something that is a bit,
yeah, they have MMO mods for Minecraft Poison. Have you not played those?
They do.
It's just an MMO mod.
Hey,
they put ray tracing in.
Yeah. Everyone, let's go to Minecraft.
You know, I visited the Middle Earth Minecraft server where this community dedicated themselves to recreating Middle Earth on a 1-to-1 scale.
Listen, that one's cool, but the Westeros one will rock your socks. That one is the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. Is the Westeros Minecraft server. Google that mess and look. It's awesome.
But I mentioned it last week, but I still want an MMO with Shadow of Mordor's Nemesis system. That'd be so awesome.
Well, that's you want that in your whole, like, that's a system that would play into your dynamic world, or that's a change that would be always happening behind the scenes, and that everyone wouldn't know every intricacy of it, but the server itself would use that underlying system to promote and have like this interwar between the NPCs themselves, and we as players are just a dynamic factor in that battle that's happening between NPCs all the time, you know? And sometimes we get caught in the middle of it. Sometimes we sway that battle. I am a big advocate. I would love to see an MMO really take the living world to its fullest. And like, listen, I'm just a little person in this world. Yep. And again, you know, I think, you know, we talk about COE on paper. There's a lot of potential for that. Of having a world that exists, it spins up, it's doing this, it's running, it exists, whether you're there or not. And I think that's, for me in an MMO experience, that's what I really like. And when I hop in there, I get to be a part of it. And when I hop out, you know, it's like, whatever. It's still moving on without me.
The other thing, too, is, like, if you made, like, a sandboxy MMO like that, you could really leverage social media, because people are going to be going out having unique experiences, and they put that on their Instagram, on their Facebook, Twitter, and all that.
That's the biggest thing I think devs are worried about, is they kind of craft this awesome experience, but 10% of their players get to have it, right? Like, I think that's something devs are absolutely terrified about, is they pouring all their time into these awesome experiences, but not everyone gets to do it, because there's no telling when some player finds the item that kicks this off, that's the catalyst for this, or kills the mob that sets this in motion. And in a living world, like, somebody gets to be the hero, and it probably won't be you. And as players, we got to be okay with that.
Well, I think that's somewhat of a fear of from the other end, though. Is it's a problem? We on the dev side saw a lot of is people like, well, I want everyone to see my content, so I'm so proud of my content. Yeah. I'm like, no, you need to go into dev with the idea of, I'm going to hide my content, and I'm hoping that one guy finds my cool content, and that's all that matters. I mean, and
Easter eggs, man.
Right, like, I put it.
They have defined games.
Oh, we do so much fun stuff.
I remember the Holo Grind. I remember the Holo Grind to get Jedi in Star Wars Galaxies, where if you're not aware, you had to get 5 holocrons. Each holocron would give you a profession to master, and then you had the 6th one, which was random, and you never knew which one it was. So you had people playing every single profession, just trying to get their Jedi. And keep in mind, this was secret for months. No one knew how to get Jedi for months.
Yep.
That's something that makes games completely amazing. And it creates lasting memories that you'll talk about forever.
Yeah.
The problem is it doesn't necessarily keep people in your game forever, but it does make your game impact people. And I think as a dev, you got to figure out what you want to do.
Not everybody was cut out to be a Jedi in Star Wars Galaxies. Like, not everybody would get it. And even if you did become a Jedi, it was a tough life, because at first they had permadeath, and then later they changed permadeath to losing experience points. So if you got ganked as a Jedi, you would be absolutely screwed. So, I mean, they made it tough.
And it was basically just a bounty hunter fest. Everybody just swarm on the server. Yeah. Jedi sighted! Kill it! Ruin that guy's experience because I don't have one.
But if you as a guild had like a Jedi or two in your guild, and you like nurtured that player, if you went to you would have to. You would have to you'd have to guard them. You'd have to protect them.
What you doing, Quest? Let's send some people with you. Come on. Don't be by yourself.
You had to do that. Yeah. But once they got up to the level of Jedi Knight and Jedi Master, you go into a PvP fight, and that guy is killing like everybody.
Yep, you're not wrong. Well, or the poison medic. Combat medics just killed everybody, and that's all.
Yeah, I will say I think it's very difficult in this day and age with how information is shared and how wikis exist. It's difficult to keep those experiences locked down, and that's why I'm more of an advocate of time-based server events that kick off. People don't realize they're happening. There's not a post about on Twitter from the development. People are like, what the crap's going on? Like, NPCs are doing blah, blah, blah. Like, that stuff in a sandbox environment, and people are trying to figure out, and maybe a quest giver or two shows up and kind of reveals a little bit of something about maybe what's going on. That type of stuff is really appealing to me. Or even if a couple players that, and I think we'll see this on COE, but a couple players that are really invested in the world, and that the devs can utilize these players to create events dynamically in the world. Would basically give them a plan and give them some things they need to do to kick this off. And they could contact these players individually, or that's just them putting their game master hand into the world. Like, let me just see.
One thing I really liked is when PlanetSide 2 first came out, they had this little promotion that they did where they got 3 YouTubers or personalities. It was they had Total Biscuit as one of them, and I forget the other 2 guys. I think it was Nanners who was one of the other ones. And they had like this little war going on between the 3 of them. They had one on each faction on the server, and I remember getting a couple kills on Total Biscuit and that was a ton of fun. And of course, they kind of revved that up and they turned it into a big thing. So.
Now, all right. So we've hit our hour number, but this conversation is going great. Are people cool with keeping going? Because there are plenty of facets of this conversation that can definitely wander into the weeds. Like, I really want to talk about new technology and how new technology may affect the MMO space.
Mouse,
okay, the show is officially over. We're now going into the bonus time.
Bonus round! All our fans, you get to see bonus time.
Everyone's leaving.
My contract did not include bonus time.
Bonus time!
Well, you get your dog to renegotiate your contract for you.
Let me see the puppy.
Working on it right now.
Belly scritches.
Puppy. Give her ear scritches. Give her ear scritches.
See how sure she's working on that bonus time?
Oh my gosh.
She's your best.
Okay, so for your bonus time, we'll pay you 5% extra of the $0 you're already getting.
Oh man, you drive a hard bargain.
You guys aren't getting paid?
Wait till you get my bill.
So this steps into what kind of people are skirting around, but I think is a truly important aspect. We now have AI. AI is a real thing. How do we move AI into the MMO space to expand and make fully, truly 100% dynamic quest experiences? Because to me, that's the next line. We saw the line happen from the standard MMO, which was pretty grindy, to WoW. And WoW said, we are going to hide the grind behind 3 trillion quests. And you're just going to quest your brains out. And now we're going to move out to the next step, which is I want to walk down a street and I want to see a house catch on fire, and this completely happens never again. And some girl runs out and goes, I just saw a thing and it just ate my kid. Go save my other kid. Yeah. Please help. And you run into the fire and you murder everybody, and yay,
Actually, you know what? This reminds me, you guys are aware of some of the deepfake technology that's out there now, right? There's websites where you can they have a website for Joe Rogan, they have a website for Jordan Peterson, where you basically type whatever you want. And it sounds a little tinny, like it's not perfect, but you can basically make these people say whatever you want. Now, imagine instead of applying this technology to make real people say things they didn't say, we just straight up port it to video games, and without having to hire 1 million voice actors,
I feel a licensing issue coming along. I feel a licensing issue somewhere. I don't know where.
But if this technology was perfected, and now imagine being able to take someone's voice, like someone who signs up to be a deepfake using this technology, and you can actually write out all the lines that could be used in the game, and you have an AI write those lines, and then all of a sudden you have like every single NPC fully voiced.
Right. Because now we don't need to bring you back in. We could write you a royalties check instead and go, hey, we've put out a new expansion. You're voice acting this, and this, if you didn't know.
But I mean, not just for voice actors, but just like a regular person. You get their voice, you capture their voice, and you do that. Yeah. And now imagine that. What if you say you wrote text to an NPC and you got voice lines back, and it's using AI background to basically have a conversation with you?
Right. I mean, see, that really is wandering into what would be the next experience in MMOs, because we have to expect right now what I would call we're walking to the 4th gen MMO. The 4th gen MMO is Star Citizen, Camelot Unchained. This whole this wash of Kickstarter MMO. That's the 4th generation MMO to me, because the first one was well, I guess maybe 5th gen, because I guess you'd call it the original ones UO and stuff like that.
We had muds in the beginning that everyone was able to.
Yeah, but we didn't call them MMOs back then.
Sure.
The UO is your 2D gameplay. Then you moved into the true 3D space, and they were the 2nd generation MMO. WoW was the 3rd generation. The WoW clones that are the epic wasteland of the MMO scape is the generation after that, and now so we would be looking at 5th generation.
We're still in the wasteland, y'all.
So if we
still in the wasteland,
depending on how that these games are successful, if they hit their niche, like Come On Chain, like you said, it doesn't need to hit 3 million subs. It needs to hit 100,000 players to be happy. It's its goal. It's where it wants to be. And if it does its goal and holds its niche, then it becomes a successful game. Across the board, if that's the same and we can hold that genre together, then we'll see the 6th generation. That's where this Kickstarter generation, because of the wasteland before it, if this Kickstarter generation fails, this is where I really see that teetering of, does the true MMORPG fail? Does it collapse in itself? Or do we have that option? If it's reasonably successful, will we see the advancement of technology through, as we talked on the Discord about VR, about AI, and a bunch of other technological aspects we just don't see in the MMO space at all.
Well, and so for me, the greatest thing I think we've talked about tonight as far as future tech would be truly dynamic event creation or event quest. For me, that would be ultimately the greatest. And obviously, there's no such thing as... Whoa, gosh. There's no such thing as...
Poison Taco, stop that.
as random. And so the challenge for the devs is to look at, like, okay, let's say burning building will be to ultimately look at how many individual variables they could give in AI to make this potentially a unique experience, like time of day, the type of NPC that goes, what's at stake, what's left in the building, what's something you potentially need to save. Is it a thing where it's doable that you can save everything, or are you going to be forced to make a sacrifice and a choice? Does the fire start in a different area? Does the fire spread dynamically? Is there something combustible in the building? Like, these are all things that I would love to be given to an AI to look at your character. If, let's say, it's spinning up the quest particularly for you, or if it's just random, kind of based off who's in the area, and it's like, all right, well, this just happened, and if no one responds, that mess burns to the ground. Like, that's an MMO I want to play, right? Like, if nobody's like, no, I don't want to. What's happening? Like, if we just sit outside this burning building and watch it burn to the ground, and the NPCs have to rebuild it. If they want a building back there, like, they've got to rebuild it, and it's like, that is, that's like, what is that, 7th gen?
Could you imagine
I want that.
No, could you imagine if they did that, but enemy NPCs had progression just the same way that players do? Could you imagine, like, an NPC character, like, say, using the Mordor Nemesis system? Say you start off with,
and then they're all just better. They just outfarm us. They're better.
Wait. You start off with like your basic like foot soldier, your basic orc, right?
Sure.
Say he kills one. No. Say he just kills like one random player because he wasn't paying attention, right? And he gets stronger. And then for whatever reason, he just kills another player and he gets stronger. And then he. and it's like this NPC.
He's AFK farming a spawn zone, and he doesn't even realize it.
But like you can roll all the way back. Asheron's Call actually had that.
Yeah.
Where mobs would kill you and gain levels. And we actually did that in the noob zone. So all the little level 1 bunnies, we got a bunch of bunnies and we stripped all our armor and laid down. When it killed one of us, it gained 10 levels and became a level 10 bunny. And there was this level 10 bunny walking around in all the level 1 bunnies. And we would sit there and watch. And the noobs would come out to go slaughter their bunnies for their noob quest. And all of a sudden they'd be like, thwack! Raw! And a level 10 bunny would eat them. It's the greatest troll ever.
But like, can you imagine that? Like with a dynamic system, like you would see something like your basic run-of-the-mill NPC could grow to become like a raid boss level of strength,
Sure.
And then they become like this terrorizing force, like laying waste to everything in their path.
It would be cool if, like, also intelligence-wise. So instead of because AI would be expensive, like on large scale. Hi Zeb. Bye Zeb.
Oh no!
I guess Zeb's leaving.
He's gone.
Messed it up.
Uh-oh.
Oh well.
Awesome.
Welcome to the bonus show, folks.
Yep.
You got half of Poison Taco's shirt. It's okay. That's
Yep.
Gaspar's
Okay.
shirt. And Zeb's.
That's fun. I lean into your camera so you're now big heads like everybody else. So I guess following your orc scenario, so as it levels up, it could gain rank, and once it gains rank, all of a sudden you can apply AI to it because it's like, okay, we don't need to have works have AI, they could just level up, right? It's a basic XP system. So you have an XP system for killing people, and somehow if it survives long enough, it gains AI and it starts gaining tactics. It starts rallying other orcs around it and things like that. That would be crazy.
It would be.
It'd be a great game.
That's a lot of. At that point, you're keeping track of every mob individually, and you're right back to that. The number of things you're really keeping track of gets massive.
And that is the one thing, whether Camelot Unchained succeeds or not, they can turn around and sell their engine. And I think the mixture of the server architecture from Amazon plus Camelot Unchained's server architecture for how to put massive amounts of people in game, you put those things together, and we may actually see a technological future where we could actually put that many objects concurrently running and being tracked without creating massive amounts of lag.
Yeah.
You also got to keep in mind, like, I don't know how much you can speak to this, Mouse, but there's like a lot of developers out there who want to go crazy and all out with their ideas, but they just simply can't.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, you are within the constraints of usually one person who is the the person who's the focus. They are the dreamer. That person usually has a lot of money, or has a very large rep, or a very large rep.
I mean, for example, when I was at CitizenCon last year, I was talking to a number of the developers, and like, for example, one of the guys who came from Crytek in Germany, he moved over to Foundry 42 in Frankfurt because the smartest thing Chris Roberts has done with that entire project was go to Frankfurt, open an office, and just start poaching all of the Crytek guys that weren't getting paid. Single best move of that entire project. The reason why we have planets is because one guy from Crytek basically did procedural generation in his spare time. Right. And he's like, oh, hey, and he did that. He also made the planetary stuff in his spare time, and he just turns around to his boss and is like, hey, boss, look what I did. And everyone looked at it, it's like, holy shit.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. You got to do it in your own time because the studio's not going to pay you for it because they want you to follow like a good sheep.
I've actually looked and seen what this guy's done, and going back to the early 2010s, he's got videos out there of him like creating an entire like city procedurally generated, and every house you can enter, every door you can walk into, and it was all destructible too. Like, so I mean, you have individual developers who have managed to solve a lot of issues, but they just haven't had the opportunity to do it.
I mean, and like anything, Star Citizen suffering for it, honestly, is the idea that if you have too many, take too many people's opinions and ideas into you just keep adding to, and you create content creep. You need a limited block of dreamers that just drive it forward, and you need a couple of chiefs and then a bunch of people who are followers. You know, if you don't have the followers and the people aren't just creating what you're telling them, there is some creative outlet through exactly how you go about those things. But at the end of the day, you need people who are just filling in the boxes and doing the paperwork, as it were. Because if you don't, you just have infinite content creep, and the product never gets done.
And let's be real, like you look at your EA and Ubisofts of the world, they're working on amazing engines, but they're not really using them for anything groundbreaking. And I think what we're getting with things like Camelot and the other crowdfunded games is we're finally able to push that technology forward.
Yeah, we could start using it in different ways because there's not such a regimented. The top of Camelot Unchained, for example, is not following a EA regiment. He can just do what he wants. He already played that game once, and that was Warhammer. And we saw what happened when you had to follow Games Workshop and EA to make a game. And so hopefully Camelot Unchained is learned it's a lesson and takes advantage of the fact of without those things.
Well, it'll certainly be whatever his vision is.
Right.
We know that.
For better or for worse. Yep. You're exactly right. Which is good. I mean, at least it'll be his vision as opposed to a compromised vision. Like you said, for better or for worse.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap it up here. So ultimately, what do you guys think? We'll go individually. Gaspar, MMO's dead?
I don't feel good about the genre. I don't see a lot of the younger generation coming in. Like I said, because they're getting the instant gratification they want from other games. The Fortnites, they're finding the PvP on a balanced scale. So those kind of people are not coming in. They're finding that they don't need other people for the amazing single player RPGs that are coming out. And so they're not coming into the. So we have what we have, and we're aging off. We really are. I think someone's going to have to do something that gets younger generations involved if it's going to survive.
Poison, what do you think?
Comatose.
Okay.
The MMO genre is in
but it'll
comatose.
wake up. It'll wake up.
Maybe. It's in a coma right now.
Okay.
We need these Kickstarted games to come out, and then we'll determine whether it's dead or not.
What about you, Mouse?
And I think I've kind of said it before, which is that, and much like what Poison Taco said, is the Kickstarter genre. This next wave of games here is the make it or break it, and if they flop, the genre I think is just going to crumble. But if they are at least marginally successful, I think it will open up the genre to be expanded into the things that will make it epic again. Virtual reality, artificial intelligence, all of these types of models that can really take it to that next level. But if we don't do it, it's dead, and no one will fund it.
Here's a good final question. Do you think these developers of these Kickstarted MMOs should they be collaborating?
I think that they should at least be selling the innovations that they're making to other studios. Like Camelot Unchained needs to, and I believe it is already, packaging and selling its engine.
The Unchained engine, yeah.
Yeah,
Because
the Unchained engine, mixing that with the back infrastructure from Amazon, because you start slapping those pieces together, and you can skip ahead and be done and be ready to like move forward.
Because, like, for example, like you're saying, all these games are going to be coming out within close proximity to each other. Say Crowfall is the first one, and Crowfall flops, right? That's not going to build a whole lot of confidence in the preceding games coming out after it.
I don't think confidence is what they need. I mean, ultimately, I think all these games are appealing to a niche audience, and there's not going to be a whole lot of overlap. It will exist, but I don't know a lot of people that have backed really heavily, like $300+ into 3 or more of these titles. I think a lot of people have kind of picked the ones that resonated with them and backed them, and the other ones are sitting on the sidelines and like, listen, if it takes off, maybe you'll hop on the train, but if it doesn't, whatever, you know.
I will kind of argue with you on that, on the subject of community, which is, of course, what this is ultimately about, is where do the MMO communities go, is that I feel that it's actually going to split MMO communities when Starsis and Camelot Unchained and Chronicles of Illyria somehow launch within 3 months of each other. That's going to create a major split, because your RPers are going to gravitate to Chronicles of Illyria, your PvPers are going to be really going for Camelot Unchained, and your sci-fires and whatnot are going to break off and go to Starsis. And I feel that's going to be a very big tug of war and damage a lot of old standing groups, or it's going to cause the death of one of these games on
or
the
all
fact,
three.
or all three, because those communities won't be able to focus and create the community there.
Your community in these titles is 50% of the content. Is the community and the structure that you bring in your guilds. That's so much of the content. And it's ultimately up to developers to engage with these communities and engage with community leaders and be like, hey, what do you need? And ask them questions and get feedback as far as, you know, the challenges they know they're going to face
The other
when
thing
entering
too,
into these titles.
The other question, too, is, I mean, Guild Wars 2 is, 7 years old now? Final Fantasy 14 has a number of years on it. I mean, eventually, as these Kickstarter games start coming out, they're probably going to pull people off of Guild Wars, off of Final Fantasy 14, off of Elder Scrolls Online, simply because they're old.
Right.
And
they're only active games because there's nothing else.
There's nothing else. So then here's the other question. Is ArenaNet going to start looking into making a Guild Wars 3? Is Square going to make a Final Fantasy 17 or 18 or whatever the hell the next MMO is? Right?
Well, that's actually the thing that we want to happen. The worst case scenario here is that the games draw from those people, cause their games to collapse, so that they have to innovate.
Then we get
to
a
move
new
forward.
experience. Yep.
Those are the companies that have the money to do that innovation and really move the genre forward.
If they're happy with the money that those titles are currently generating, because you could be right. Like they could just be riding out ANET, be like, we're just going to ride this title into the dirt, and they have no plans for Guild Wars 3.
Right.
I mean, we know they had future plans. Yeah, they had future plans that they laid people off from. So
yeah.
But anywho, that's our time. We need to go ahead and wrap it up there.
All right. So I think we're gonna, like as Pookie said, we're gonna wrap this up. But I want everybody to go check us out on Patreon. Please donate, help fund. This actually costs kind of a lot of money to keep doing these. So any donations help us out a lot. So go to our Patreon. Also, come if you want to express your ideas, your thoughts, anything like that. You want to tell us subjects that you want us to talk about. Go to our Discord. Also, we're on Twitter. We have 2 different additional shows, and looking at, I think, another third one that's coming out. But we have on Tuesdays, we have the MMO Grind. It's Puka and I talking to either to each other or to people we're interviewing to discuss wonderful things about the MMO genre, as well as we have Zaylin, who is also doing his Thursday show. All that, the details of the information is down in the stuff below. Yeah, description. Yes, all down in the description. I always there's a guy I watch. He always says down in the doobly doo. So down in the description, so it'll give you the times and when we're streaming those shows. But Zayla is doing a show on leadership, like breaking down the real details of what leadership means and how it interacts with the game space. So go check out those shows, and thank you very much for coming out.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Good night.
I'm sure
Leadership
this will be the last
still
time I
stand in the
show my
goddamn
picture.
fire.
No, this is your last time. That was
All right, thank you. Finally, I'm fired. I love it.